On behalf of the leadership of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, particularly the DVC for the College of Law and Management Studies, I have the honor to welcome you to this public lecture on the theme Executives' Perspectives on the Use of Artificial Intelligence to Address Cyber Security Risks, which is going to be delivered by none other than Professor Grant Allen Bittman from the Institute of Global Leadership Institute in Brisbane, Australia. Before I go on further, this public lecture is happening at a very important time in the history of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. The university has just from the beginning of this year implemented a 10-year strategic plan, moving from a 5-year strategic plan. And it has 5 pillars, which we call goals. And one of the goals that is encapsulated in that strategic model is actually internationalization. And others include high impact society and stakeholder community engagement and excellent high impact research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And one of the key things about this strategy is that it puts a lot of premium to internationalization and also bringing in the university high-ranking academics from across the world to be able to engage with us. So in a way, all of you gathered here, particularly Professor Bittman, you are making a significant contribution to the achievement of our strategic plan. And also the fact that this public lecture is happening at a time when we have had, cyber attacks on our systems within the university, to the extent that at some stage our systems were down for almost more than a week. And recently, in fact, last week and partly this week, we moved online because of students' disturbance in the university. And one of the things we immediately experienced was that students were enrouting into even the lectures online and scrambling the screens and so forth. And we have had situations where staff emails have been taken over by enrouters and used to send messages to other parties. So I must say that this public lecture is therefore happening a very important point in time and the context in which we find ourselves in. Maybe just to give you about our context so that you can be able to also understand how we are configured. We are one of the big 5 universities in South Africa. South Africa has 26 universities, public universities, and we are one of those one of the 5 big ones, with about 45,000 students and about 4,000 staff. And we operate on different campuses, spread in 2 different metropolis. We have a huge proportion of partnerships across the world. We have about 190 alumni who wish to engage with us from across the world. We are configured in such a way that we operate in a college model, a college structure. So we have 4 colleges in the university: College of Engineering, College of Humanities, College of Health Sciences, and College of Law and Management Studies, in which our school is founded. We have 19 schools across the university, which are headed by deans and head of school. The colleges are headed by the deputy vice chancellors, of course, who report to the vice chancellor. And so we are quite a decentralized kind of university that relies largely on technological integration for us to move our processes forward. And so issues to do with the security of our systems should be really of great concern. And I was also just looking at, there was a quote here from World Economic Forum that says that higher education is a systemic failure, which doesn't equip graduates with the skills needed to solve the 21st century problems. And this also points to the fact that we need to be able to innovate increasingly, to be able in tune to provide the skills needed to operate in this environment. And these skills are by and large dependent on new technologies, much more so maybe the fourth industrial revolution. But then this also comes with a lot of issues which we believe we need to address in our environment. Issues of privacy, confidentiality, data protection, detect crime, access, particularly the digital divide, intellectual property. We are also, as an academic institution, concerned that technology is said to be going to replace about 800 million workers by 2030, according to the McKinsey Global Institute, and that 50% of jobs are vulnerable to automation. This raises further concerns to do with ethics and invasion of people's privacy, including dignity to life. And so as we look at how technology can be used, how we can be able to stave off the issue of cybersecurity, let's also look at how we can be able to enhance the dignity of people. Finally, we have just implemented our strategic plan. And one of the things that I noticed immediately I saw the title of your public lecture, I realized that we don't have much of a risk mitigation, especially from the perspective of technology, and more so cybersecurity. And so this is a very important public lecture for us as an university. And so I want to take this opportunity to welcome you and also welcome the others who are attending from all over the world. And therefore, at this point, I want to hand over to the academic lead of the discipline of Information Systems and Technology, Dr. Upasana Singh, to be able to present the lecture. Thank you so much, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Prof. Matula. Good morning to everyone, and good afternoon to Prof. Pittman, or good evening to Prof. Pittman. The webinar which is being hosted, or this webinar which is being hosted by the discipline of IS&T, holds paramount significance in today's digital landscape. As cybersecurity threats grow in complexity and frequency, the insights shared in this webinar, I am sure, will offer invaluable guidance. The perspectives of executives can shed light on how artificial intelligence can be harnessed to combat evolving cyber risks. This knowledge can also help organizations and decision makers to stay ahead of potential threats, enhance their cybersecurity strategies, and safeguard sensitive data and digital infrastructure. The discipline of IS&T in the School of MIG has great pleasure in hosting Prof. Pittman today. Prof. Pittman holds a PhD and multiple qualifications, including an M.Admin, Graduate Certificate in Applied Management, a BA degree, and various other certificates. Over his 17 years, he's held academic roles at universities and institutes, specializing in criminal justice, public policy, accounting, and arts, amongst others. Prof. Pittman has served in 8 research centers, authored over 50 publications, supervised PhD students, and held ministerial appointments. With a 40-year career in the Queensland Police Service, he managed substantial budgets and ICT projects. Currently, Prof. Pittman is the president of 2 institutes, that is the Leaders Institute and Global Leadership Institute in Brisbane, Australia, as well as a Research Policy House Director. Prof. Pittman, we welcome you and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Lee, and thank you for the invitation, Dr. Singh and your colleagues, to present on artificial intelligence and cybersecurity at an executive level. What I have done to help the listeners is there is a PowerPoint presentation, and with the PowerPoint presentation, there is also a paper I have written, which can be made available to any participant in this presentation, and Dr. Singh has a copy of that, and you may make a request out of her or her department to get a copy of that paper if you so desire. I should thank Dr. Singh for inviting me. My background is probably an area that may interest many of you. I currently work in ag business and accounting for Leaders Institute, and I also work in a new institute which specialises in police, counterterrorism, and cybersecurity leadership at a master's level. In my policing profession, I worked for many years in information, communication and technology, dealing with national and state software and networks and systems and security arrangements, and was involved in expenditures of over $1 billion in those fields over a period of time. And in recent times, I've become more involved in the research on the cybersecurity area. So I have an extensive background in cybersecurity. Artificial intelligence, I think, actually probably had its foundations in integration intelligence systems in military and policing probably several decades ago. And so I've been familiar with artificial intelligence concepts for probably 15 to 20 years. So the PowerPoint that I've presented tonight is, and I say tonight because in Australia it's nighttime, daytime in your time. We'll just give you an overview of the paper, and I'll start off by giving you the framework that I'll present for you tonight. So what I've done in the PowerPoint presentation is there's an introduction giving you a broad scope of what's occurring globally. I've added a few definitions, and there's probably hundreds of different definitions, but all have similar characteristics and elements to them. I've tried to provide an overview of the problem that is occurring internationally, and I've also provided numerous case studies, but I'll only reference one of them tonight. And again, they're all in the paper. If you'd like a copy of the paper, you're welcome to talk to Dr. Singh. One area that's not discussed at length is the legal mandates that are starting to emerge in the cybersecurity and the artificial intelligence area. I particularly wanted to highlight human resource management strategies, because we tend to talk in the technical field, but not in the human dimension of what impacts on human resources. And then I've tried to provide 9 core strategies that senior executives and CEOs will need to look at. And in conclusion, I'd like to just highlight that artificial intelligence will be far more extensive with the development of quantum technology in the computer systems and having multi-layered artificial intelligence capabilities that will yet be developed probably over the next 5 to 10 years to deal with cybersecurity. Just to give you a little bit of the landscape, is some statistics for you. Certainly, cyber crime, they estimate in the next couple of years will be worth over $10 trillion. And that's a significant cost globally to the world. The universities just mentioned that they've had a breach already just in the last little while. And the data being provided out of the US suggests that most organisations of some note will end up expending over $4 million in dealing with cyber attacks progressively. I particularly am interested in the workplace because we tend to find that those employees that we have and the senior executive, there is an impact on their well-being that should be taken into account in the space of cyber security and how organisational policies and procedures actually operate. Certainly risk to organisations, which has already been mentioned by this university, but it's common to all organisations. There are impacts on finances, customers, and competition. And I've mentioned down the bottom, it also affects data, brand reputation, certainly privacy, and one emerging issue of significant note is identity theft. I have also observed the rise of the cybersecurity specialist. Generally, the specialist has always been in the organisation and has not been heavily involved other than risk management strategies, but they're starting to emerge now as probably one of the key executive roles and connections to the specialist in cybersecurity. In education and training, one of the reasons we are looking at a master's level is that education and training internationally is exploding, not only for the technical side, but for the chief information officers. And we want to explore more and more the leadership role of the CEOs and the executives, which has not been explored extensively in research in recent years. And the landscape with artificial intelligence has emerged and will continue to be developed. But at the moment, some of the capabilities are basically hope requests that they may solve all of the cybersecurity problems. So that's a broad overview of some of the issues I want to present tonight for you, or today if you're overseas. We in Global Leadership Institute became interested in cybersecurity leadership as a result of a professor from an Australian university called Bill Calleen. And he operated out of one of the largest universities in Australia and was a champion of the education by senior executive on cybersecurity. He advocated for this some 20 years ago, but in this country, and he's an international specialist who advises the Americans and Europe and UK. He's advocated this issue for a long time. And he believes that education for not only cybersecurity, but artificial intelligence for executives. It was interesting that this particular professor was made redundant by his university some 10 years or so ago because the Vice Chancellor believed that there wasn't a major issue in cybersecurity that would affect us. So it's ironical that his prophecy into the future, if you want to use that term, has come to fruition. One of the major developments is risk management and mitigation strategies in cybersecurity. And most organisations have risk management plans and mitigation strategies, but rarely are they actually acted upon, and executives take too long to action them. I'm not presenting in this paper or discussion tonight any specific software or technical issues, but I'm more interested in the decision-making processes by CEOs and their executives. One of the emerging trends probably in the last 5 years or so is the legislation now affecting CEOs and their organisations. In my home country of Australia, in United Kingdom and Europe, in America and Canada, the legislation now is requiring organisations to report, to carry out investigations, and in some cases, the failure to do that or to have the appropriate risk management strategies in place, there are significant penalties to be imposed on those organisations. I also want to highlight that one makes an assumption quite often that artificial intelligence is only used in an organisation by their cyber security specialists. But the converse is also true, that cyber criminals are going to use artificial intelligence, and when they have access to them, quantum computer technology to interface into cybersecurity into the future. There is a fair bit of literature suggesting at the moment that artificial intelligence tends to be a buzzword used in organisations, and particularly with senior executives, believing that IA is the solution to cybersecurity. But that is still evolving. It will take some time before IA and ultimately quantum technology will have a capability to significantly deal with cybersecurity. I have referred to in the paper a number of pieces of legislation and legal issues. Probably the first group to look at cybersecurity and artificial intelligence was the European Parliament. And there's a significant paper written by that group about why they felt artificial intelligence and cybersecurity should be legislated on in Europe. But again, there's a long way to go for the legislation, and at the moment it's only in its embryonic status. One of the reasons I've just put in some definitions for you is recently we had a review by an academic here in Australia looking at some courses, and he made the comment that cybersecurity and cybercrime are not related. And I've always argued that the two go hand in hand. What I've provided is some very basic definitions of what cybersecurity, cybercrime, and artificial intelligence. And I've put down the threat to intelligence, which is the decision-making process that needs to be used by senior executives. So essentially, those definitions can vary. As I said, there's probably a couple of hundred variations of it. This paper provides some from some of the more prominent information technology papers that have been written on it. But the basic elements are fundamentally the same. So the paper does have some definitions which will help students or participants understand the concepts and the definitions used in the paper that's been delivered. What I've tried to do in the paper, if you wish to read it, and is to identify the problem in broad terms worldwide. And generally, CEOs at the present time and executives believe the solution to cybersecurity is to buy more products and get more people involved. But they're running into difficulties because this involves budgetary costs and, of course, staffing commitments. And there's a trend, not only in my home country of Australia, but internationally, having access to cybersecurity experts. So the problem is going to be exacerbated over the next few years, and senior executives and CEOs are going to have to be more innovative in how they deal with this, including their policy and practices. I previously mentioned the cyber criminals. We've yet to see much in the literature in this area, but certainly in the industry, it's known that cyber criminals are starting to use artificial techniques to target organizations. Certainly the statistics indicate that it's a growing issue. That one estimate is that there's a 240% increase in attacks annually globally. So that's a significant increase. Some of and it's a little outdated, the data, by a few years, but the malware variants and families are significantly large across the globe, and certainly access to them is quite prevalent now. I think, based off the literature and what is starting to occur in the industry, will be used to detect and to possibly solve attacks by cyber criminals. But there needs to be more analysis and research in this area. And the next generation of IA will be able to potentially detect the threat of cybersecurity attacks. So that is an emerging area. I'd say within the next 5 years, industry will take a lead role in this area, and academics will probably do more research in this area to find what works in the industry. I keep mentioning the cyber criminals mainly because they're also just as innovative as industry, and they will develop new swarm bots to attack systems, and this will be an interesting development in what I call cybersecurity and artificial intelligence chess games, where one will try to counter the other progressively over the next 5 to 10 years. One of the issues, and it's particularly raised by the cybersecurity specialists, is the volume of alerts. And this creates a major challenge for the specialist in trying to deal with the volume that has occurred. And of course, being able to provide advice and information to senior executives becomes a critical issue if there is too much volume, and being able to make decisions. And of course, there is the problem of false positives when you're triaging the data. So again, there's an assumption by the senior executive and CEOs that the specialists are able to provide the positive information that is occurring for an attack on their organization. But of course, that's a new skill that's being emerged, and timeliness is the critical issue for senior executives. Certainly, the artificial intelligence systems and investments have increased sixfold, including the processing capacity in the artificial intelligence. Certainly in the academic world, it's being used extensively. Certainly in the business world, it's being used extensively. So it'll have wider variety of capacity over the next 5 to 10 years. I've mentioned here that security teams and vendors will be exploiting the artificial intelligence capabilities more extensively and will be offering services that will deal with cybersecurity. But again, that's an emerging trend. Again, I just want to reference that cybercrime is the major factor driving cybersecurity. And when you look at the amounts involved there, that is the major reason why cybersecurity has become a critical issue in global affairs. An area that I don't think has been discussed a lot in the literature, but is starting to emerge, is the post-COVID workers. Many of us here may work remotely from home, and the issues of firewalls and security gates and network connections and so on haven't yet been fully targeted in the cybersecurity space. And some reports suggest that there's been a 60% increase in attacks in the last few years. And the point that I really want to make, and again, it's not on the agendas to a large degree of CEOs and senior executives, is the mental health issues of employees. I think the executives are worrying about the customer outside, but may forget the issue of well-being and anxiety of their own employees. And that will become more and more a critical issue in dealing with cybersecurity attacks within the organizations. What I have done here is, in the paper, if you wish to get it, there are over 15 variations and cases that have occurred over the last decade around the world. And they vary in cost to organizations, cost to nations, and in some cases, loss of life and property. But I just wanted to highlight one particular case that was probably one of the starting points on legal action around the world. And it involved a bank called Tesco in Scotland. And the cyber attack was able to get a hold of the debit card transactions. And although the fraud and detection system picked it up, it wasn't for some time. I think it was about 48 hours before they actually recognized that it was an attack. And by that time, they estimate that just over £2 million was deducted from credit cards of customers. Now, there was a review by the Financial Conduct Authority in England as to the performance of the bank and the loss of the money. And as a result of the review, they had a penalty imposed of just over £16 million. But it was interesting to note that in the findings that the fraud policy was not adequate, even though the senior executive had endorsed the policy. And they did have a fraud detection policy and rules, but they weren't adequate. So it was not only the advice from the Chief Information Officer and his or her staff, but also the senior executive hadn't fully understood the risk and mitigation strategies that needed to be applied. The review also suggests that the true figures of loss for Tesco Bank was more likely to be in billions of pounds. And for the next year, Tesco Bank made no profits. And just as a final comment, in England, at the same time the bank was attacked, there was almost 2 million incidences of cyber-related attacks in England alone. So there's a case study with some information that demonstrates, I think, the point that the senior executive and also the specialist probably didn't fully understand the risk, and the mitigations were somewhat limited in their policy and regulations. I just want to make a comment about legal mandates as well. There is a lot of development in the international domestic laws on artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Certainly the United Nations commenced work in this area almost 10 years ago, and suggested in their papers and documentation that international laws and domestic laws needed to be strengthened in this area. The laws are now being implemented by most countries, not all countries, but most Western democracies have introduced some form of legislation from 2018. That includes United Kingdom, Europe, Australia, America, Canada, and various countries. But not all countries have introduced it. And it is worth a read on international law about the issue of counterattacking cybersecurity agents in countries like Russia and China, which see it as a cyber warfare issue. So again, the legislation is mostly domestic driven, but there are some major implications at the international level, which will be problematic for various countries over probably the next decade or so. What I've tried to highlight here is, because there's not a lot written in the literature about human resource management, I've tried to highlight that future policies in companies and organisations and firms will need to help support employees with better understanding about what attacks are. There will need to be mental health support with anxiety and stresses caused within the organisation itself. And certainly training and education will be a critical component of better understanding cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. And there may need to be a different range of human resource capabilities in the organisation, particularly dealing with mental health stresses, where there may need to be support from flexible working hours, including financial implications if their personal data has not been properly secured. And there will be the emergence of cybersecurity staff in more significant numbers, and will have to be managed in a human resource management strategy. What I've tried to do here is to sort of summarize, I think, 9 areas that CEOs and executives will have to have as strategies in the future. And the first one is they will need to have, as part of their strategic vision, the impact of cybersecurity and artificial intelligence as part of their vision. that has been an emerging trend to reference technology, but certainly not the cybersecurity and the artificial intelligence area. Senior executives will also need to far better understand the risks and potential risks in cybersecurity. At the present time, they tend to leave it to their technical people that they will resolve the problem. But when it affects the whole organisation, then their lack of understanding is usually the major contributing factor. Organisations will have to have a culture meaning values that support security within their organisations. This will require a significant change. Having worked in government, in one area where I worked, there was a view that security wasn't an essential part for the open sourcing of data. But coming from an organisation that is very secure in policing, they basically influenced the government policy that security needed to be a key aspect of their data storage capabilities. Governance frameworks, I think if you were to read the case studies that were made available, you'll find that governance is probably the critical factor in all that occurred in organisations that have been affected by cybersecurity and are now looking at artificial intelligence capabilities. Certainly, the governance needs to be strengthened with its roles and responsibilities and decision making, and certainly with the resources and expertise. To me, that is a critical aspect of the strategic planning of senior executives. Certainly, there needs to be a better communication and understanding between information communication technology teams, the security professionals, and the legal and external partners, which senior executives will need to ensure occurs. Risk management processes need to be certainly strengthened, but also understood by senior executives. And I think the world is changing very quickly, and with the development of new technologies in quantum computers and those other related technologies, senior executives and their teams need to understand where these trends are going. There also needs to be a strong engagement between external parties and industry, and there needs to be regular reviews of their cybersecurity content. In conclusion, I just want to highlight a couple of points for you. That cybersecurity technology will grow substantially with artificial intelligence as a cornerstone, and some of the reports are suggesting up to 19 billion will be developed in this market, and currently is, but over the next few years. To me, the critical issue of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity will be a cat and mouse game between those who are attacked and those who are attacking. So it will be like a chess game. And there will be a strong emphasis with executives that they don't want to be the victims. So there will be strong senses of security. I highlight the issue of quantum technology, which is starting to emerge globally, and certainly universities are in this space, particularly in my country here in Australia, but also the private sector. And there'll be a lot of development and competition over quantum technology and its impact on cybersecurity in the very near future. And I think the critical issue is the challenge that will face us with artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. And this will have to be the issue that CEOs and executives will have to manage and govern, and governance through processes to handle how their influences affect their organisation, and ultimately will determine their own job security in the future. So you may see CEOs and executives lose their position in organisations for failure to address artificial intelligence and cybersecurity trends into the future. Dr. Singh, I'm happy to conclude there and take any comments.
Thank you, Prof. Pittman, for that short and to the point presentation. I think a lot of issues have been highlighted in that presentation. In particular, something which stood out for me was the role of HR and providing support for employees in terms of education about cyber attacks, about cybersecurity in general, the role of artificial intelligence, providing the mental health support facilities for them, and having this continuous training and education. We do have a number of questions which have been posed by our attendees, so I'm going to start with that first before opening it up to the floor. The first question we have today is if there is a possibility that AI could eventually replace the need for human cybersecurity teams entirely.
The literature is arguing that point at the present time, that that may be the trend into the future, but certainly they're not predicting that in the near future. What I mean is the next 10 years, the human element will still be required. But if we move to the quantum computer technology, which is multi-layered artificial intelligence, then certainly there is the capability of probably replacing some human activity in the artificial intelligence. But that's some space we'll need to look at as time goes on. And certainly, whoever provided the question, that would make a good PhD research topic.
Wonderful. Essentially, I think we're not actually ready to get rid of human beings completely at this point in our lives. The next question is, what are some cost-effective AI-driven tools or technology solutions that small businesses can implement to enhance their cybersecurity posture?
Look, the literature is showing more and more software and products on the market, and the information from the artificial and cybersecurity companies, the big companies like Cisco and those are suggesting that they may provide a short-term solution, but as a long-term solution, because of the changes in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity issues, particularly in the cybercrime space, may not be effective in detection. So I think, again, it's going to be that we're going to see more and more advances in technology over the next 5 to 10 years. And at the moment, it's like going to an ice cream shop, picking which is your favourite ice cream. But in the future, it might be just one all the same ice cream.
Thank you. The next one we have is, why is it punishable to use artificial intelligence?
That's an interesting question. Different countries are taking different approaches with artificial intelligence. Here in Australia, the education sector, including universities, are grappling with the problem of whether or not artificial intelligence should be used by students. Some of the universities are arguing that it should be taught as a mainstream subject. some of the education departments abandoned it. To me, it's like an iPhone. If you've got new technology, why not make good use of it? Of course, there's the counter arguments about artificial intelligence systems at the moment, like Chat GPT, that all the information may not be totally accurate. And I think what you're going to see is that it will be accepted, but there will be different strategies adopted by organisations about how to use it. For example, universities, I believe, will accept it, but they may have to change their assessment strategies and be a little bit more innovative with their assessment strategies. But you'll find different countries will become experts in certain artificial intelligence. Australia wants to be the leader in business artificial intelligence. China, for example, wants to be the leader in military artificial intelligence. So you may have groupings around the world in different areas of expertise. So I think the students will find, and I think businesses have already adopted it, that they're keen to use artificial intelligence. The only respite to the issue lies on whether or not the information is totally accurate, and that may require a human intervention for a while longer.
Thanks. I think one of the key questions in higher education here in South Africa at the moment is whether to embrace this artificial intelligence, as you're saying, in higher education, or to ban it completely. And I think that there is a middle path that we need to follow, as you said, because students do need to be taught how to interact with artificial intelligence tools in order to get their education more applicable to the workforce once they go out there, because there's going to be a lot of artificial intelligence once they get into the job market itself. We have 3 more questions on the chat, and then we'll move to our audience. So the first one is, what is the risk of using artificial intelligence in the first instance, and how can such a risk be mitigated or reduced? I think you've already alluded to some of these in your previous response.
Look, the interesting development is our children in countries that have access to computers are already using it. Certainly, it's shown in America that several people have got their medical degrees using it. I'm just not sure if I'd be happy about them dispensing medication to me if they've not studied but used artificial intelligence applications to get their medical degree. So there are some risks with it that can be quite dangerous. But I think, as I said, it's like using calculators. We used calculators 30, 40 years ago at uni. Before that, we had to do it in our head, but now you have the calculators and the iPhones and everything else. I think it's just an evolution, but there are some risks that we have yet to identify, or we have identified, but developing the appropriate governance strategies is another particular issue that not only universities will have to deal with, the government will have to deal with, and also the private sector.
Thank you. The last one that we have on the chat is, have there been any successful prosecutions on the misuse of artificial intelligence?
That's an interesting question, that one. I have read a couple of short reports on it, but that could be one of the emerging issues out of the legislation, particularly if incorrect information is used from artificial intelligence by a company or government sector, which impacts on the lives of customers or the citizens of the community. And I have read that there are some current judicial reviews in that space, but nothing of any substance to be able to go one way or the other on it. So I think the legal profession, particularly those in legal academic circles will enjoy the watching the emergence of case law in that space internationally as well in their local areas. And I think that will be one of the specializations in law faculties and in legal firms probably over the next decade.
Thank you, Prof. We have a number of thank yous to you, which have been sent on the chat for your presentation. They believe that the understanding of the cybersecurity risk is key and essential to all sectors of the economy and all disciplines in the university itself. We have one question related to quantum computing by Deepak Kumar, who's a lecturer at UKZN, who's asking whether artificial intelligence or how will artificial intelligence and quantum computing shape the future landscape of information security, particularly in the fintech sector.
Which sector, sorry?
Fintech. Fintech, finance.
Oh, finance, sorry.
Yeah, finance.
Oh, look, the reason I've mentioned cybersecurity is most of the major developed countries in the world are expending billions of dollars in the cybersecurity area, and are not the cybersecurity, in quantum computer technology. And in Australia, the Australian government wants to be the lead in the world on business quantum technology. Now, that's a multi-layered artificial intelligence capability, which means it can cover more than one field multiple times and give you a response. The finance area is an interesting one because we have global trends on how finance should be managed and how that would operate. It also has impact on, including cybersecurity, on business arrangements between certain countries. In other words, certain countries may have access to the information from quantum computer technology, including finances, which may be limited by cybersecurity access between countries. So I think the question is a good question because the financial side of things has yet to fully see the consequences of artificial intelligence, and particularly multi-layered artificial intelligence from quantum computers. But I wasn't able to ascertain in any of my research specific references to quantum computers and finances, only to the business sector generally.
Probably still an emerging area. We have a question from Kirsten, who asks about any insights or experience on Fraud GPT, which is a product sold on the dark web and Telegram that works similarly to Chat GPT, but creates content to facilitate cyber attacks.
Actually, I think she's probably raising the best question. I think that's going to be the issue, is how, and of course, I think Google's about to put out a product and a few other groups on chat systems. So it won't be just one group, it could be quite a few groups. As for cybersecurity, look, I think both sides, the attacker and those who are being attacked, will use AI. And that's why I said it's going to be interesting if they get access to the quantum computers, because they can do it multi-layered. And so you could be attacked at multi-levels with types of malware. But again, the literature's starting to talk about it, but there's not a lot of information that I can find on the subject yet. But again, that would make a very good PhD if you'd like to write about it.
Yes, I think what's key that from your presentation is that there's a lot of areas of emerging research, and for the students who are listening in today, there's a number of proposed research topics that can be gleaned from your presentation. There also seems to be a number of emerging specialities in disciplines related to cybersecurity, which is cross-disciplinary or affecting a lot of disciplines at the moment. We have one last question here. Can Prof comment on the involvement or significance of internal auditors on the management of cybersecurity risk?
Yeah, that's a very good question too, Dr. Singh. Can I make a comment about your previous comment about research into the future? I have a personal opinion that one of the problems with our academic world at the moment is that we try to put new fields of study or programs of courses into old fields of titles. In other words, we talk about IT and governance as a field, management IT and governance, but should cybersecurity and artificial intelligence become a field in their own right? In other words, we try to lump them together rather than expand them. What was your second question again? Sorry.
So what was the, can Prof comment on the involvement of internal auditors on management of cybersecurity risk?
One of the observations that I've observed with internal auditors is some look at risk management and mitigation strategies in a very generic term, and others become more specific depending on their knowledge of the field in which they're operating in. And why I say that is you can have an IT technical person who has some familiarity with cybersecurity as against a chief security officer who is very in-depth. So the problem in the governance process is you've got to have risk management strategies now that I think are much more specific. So in your auditing area, you're better off having somebody who's a more specialised in the knowledge and skills in that area as against a generic IT specialist. And that's why I was saying, Dr. Singh, quite often we lump cybersecurity as an extra on IT, whereas perhaps there's a whole new field of study and research that should be emancipated rather than being driven by old philosophies.
I strongly believe that as well, that there is an entirely new area or a specialization that is emerging, and just tying, as you said, cybersecurity into IT, or tying cybersecurity into computer science because it deals with security and technology issues, does not do justice to the theme and to the field of cybersecurity itself. So maybe the establishment of a cybersecurity institute at higher education institutions would do more justice to the field of cybersecurity. An AI institute or a discipline of AI itself could eventually emerge in the future. We don't have any further questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I would just like to open the floor up to any of the attendees. If anybody would like to speak to Prof. Pittman, you are able to raise your hand, and our host, Hazel, will be able to unmute you if you would like to speak. Okay. We don't seem to have any further interaction. So, Prof. Pittman, do you have a few last closing comments before I thank you to you? Appreciate it.
Dr. Singh, I would recommend, if they would like to get a hold of the article, to contact you, and there's greater in-depth material in the article. The PowerPoint was a very quick peripheral view of the issues. So the paper may help fill in some of the information vacuum that I created when I was going through. So they're most welcome to do that. But I'm a believer that leadership and governance are the critical issue for the future. And we need to probably support those in leadership in organisations and public and private sector to help them develop a knowledge, expertise in this. And in Australia, there is no university offers specialisation in cybersecurity leadership. And that's what that Professor Bill Cataloni, who set up the international and the national cybersecurity associations, highlighted that is the greatest weakness of the educational processes internationally is in the space of cybersecurity leadership, which also now includes artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Prof. Prof. Mutula.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Asana. I just want to take this opportunity to express our deep and sincere thanks to Professor for his well-nuanced and depth of analysis of this subject. Going by the comments I'm seeing on the chart, it would appear people are profusely satisfied with his presentation. And I believe that given his depth of understanding this area, we shall come to him perhaps again in future to invite him to come and also deliver another public lecture, and if possible, even invite him to come to campus if he's able to do so. So I just want to say thank you so much from our perspective. We are really grateful to you for the time you have taken to come and speak to us. Thank you so much. And thank you for the participants for finding time to come and attend this particular public lecture. We really appreciate your presence. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Prof. Pittman, and we look forward to hosting you at some stage at UKZN in person. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and thank you, Hazel, for all your support.